chased by the deep state, fighting for independence, thinking about revolution, looking for alternative solutions. The enemies of the deep state will tell you what others even don't dare to think. Manuel Ochsenreiter and Mateusz Piskorski.
Hello. This is the podcast DieGutenMenschen, Public Enemies of the Deep State. My name is Manuel Ochsenreiter, Editor-in-Chief of Zuerst magazine in Germany, and my colleague and partner Mateusz Piskorski from Poland on the other side. Hello, Mateusz.
Yes, hello from Poland.
How are the things in Poland? What is the front line doing to Czech Republic?
Well, we have retreated, unfortunately, so for the moment being, the war is over, but I think it's a truce.
Yes, but the Polish soldier was again fighting like a hero, I hope, right?
Of course, as always. You know.
Yes, of course. Today we have an interesting guest from Washington, D.C., what means District of Columbia, because we are also in an educational podcast. So this is our friend, writer, and former U.S. diplomat, Michael Springmann. Hello, Michael.
Hi, how are you? I'm enjoying being on your show. I'm very appreciative and grateful for it.
Thank you so much. Bad people are always fine, as we say. So, so you are now on a real dissident podcast here. And we wanted to talk to you a little bit because you wrote an interesting book about Europe, what is called Goodbye Europe. It's a book about, especially about Angela Merkel's policy, also about the future of Europe. And you don't paint it in very light colors. It looks very dark, what you wrote. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that.
Sure, I can. It's Goodbye Europe, ? Hello Chaos, ? Merkel's migrant bomb. It's just been translated into German with the title Überrollt Europa, Deutschland und die Migrantenkrise. Mm-hmm. And it's a really dark picture of what happened as a result of American and Israeli wars in South Asia, Southwest Asia, and North Africa, essentially destroying the countries, their infrastructure, their housing, everything from sewage treatment plants to water processing plants, factories, and so forth. And they essentially did to the region what they did to Germany during the war. It was dehoused, deculturalized, and destroyed, and destabilized as well. The people were then carefully guided out of these regions into Europe, mostly through the Balkans, but some across the Mediterranean to Italian islands in the Mediterranean. And with the destruction of Libya, it removed all the checks on any kind of migrant wave moving from sub-Saharan Africa into Europe. And the idea, according to the people who were architects of this, and not only Merkel, but the people who persuaded Merkel to get into this, there was the Dutch politician who had been prime minister of the Netherlands. There was a fellow named Sutherland who had been with the United Nations Migrant Office. And then there was a Austrian think tank head who was close to George Soros. And they basically all agreed that Europe was far too white. It was far too monocultural, although I thought there was a certain difference between Germans and Italians and Frenchmen and Hungarians and Swedes and so forth. But they all wanted new people in Europe to change the outlook of Europe and to bring in cheap labor, just like has happened in the United States with the swarms of migrants crossing the southern border. You can get people to work cheap. Whereas Germans like to work dear, and any workman wants to be paid for his time and services. But these people are grateful for any opportunity that they would get, and they don't care what happens. And the book essentially is an analysis of another book written by Kelly Greenhill, who was very close to the national security state here in America. She wrote a book called Weapons of Mass Migration. And the idea is that you create a situation in which the population of one country has to leave because of the terrible political and economic situation there. And then they leave, and it weakens the country because they lose the best and the brightest people for the most part. and then they flood into another country that takes them in. And of course, most of the countries of the world have signed asylum agreements, have signed agreements promising at least short-term help towards people who are refugees and can't go back to their own country because their own country can't support them or protect them. And this results in a clash within the host country that's receiving all of these migrants, because you have the Gutbürger who wants to welcome them with candy and flowers, and then there's the Wutbürger who wants somebody to say, wait a minute, this is our country, we get to decide who comes in, and you have an internal clash between these two groups, plus the clash that they all have with the migrants, who often come from a country with a different set of customs and background and history and language and religion. So you end up with a three-way fight, and it weakens everyone. And, of course, the United States is standing on the sidelines ready to pick up the pieces once Germany and the other powerhouses of Europe shut down as a result of this migrant flood. And, of course, it separates them from Russia with its vast natural resources and its population and the opportunity to become a more powerful state than it is now.
That is very so here we have to make a cut. I didn't expect stop to stop. So we make here a cut, and I think Mateusz wanted to ask something.
Yes. Well, I would like to ask you about your estimation of how this policy of United States continues now under Trump administration. But it's more like, not about history, not about the things you were writing about in your books, but rather about a kind of comparison between the former administrations, I mean the former Republican, particularly Republican administrations, and the present administration of Donald Trump. And what, if anything, has changed, and if yes, then what has changed since that time?
Well, I don't see any change either between Trump and the two Bush presidencies that some people call the Bush crime syndicate, or even from Barack Obama, Trump's immediate predecessor. They both have wars going from Libya to Afghanistan. Trump has promised in his election campaign in 2016 that he would leave these areas, he would bring the soldiers home, and that he would put an end to the forever war. And that he went on and continued on and increased the problems that the Obama administration had made with immigrants, or migrants, if you will. Obama created something called the CARP program, the Comprehensive Application Analysis Review Program. And what it is the idea is you have to keep out Muslims at all costs. And if you're a Muslim, you needn't apply for immigration benefits, even though you're entitled to them. Obama did this. He was never called out on it. He was the guy who said, all right, we're going to import 650,000 people who brought to the United States illegally as children. He had no legal authority for that, but he got it through and everybody loved it. And Trump began questioning that. And he said, no, we want this stopped, but he's been forestalled in this by the courts. I think also, in addition, Trump is again talking about withdrawing American soldiers as a run-up to his campaign in November of this year. But what, in fact, he's doing is saying, yes, I will remove soldiers. I will take 9,500 soldiers out of Germany, where they've been stationed in an occupying force since 1945. But I'm not taking them back to the United States. I'm sending them on to Poland, to occupy Poland. Mm-hmm. And I don't see what American interests there are in Poland, that they need nearly 10,000 more soldiers. And I see it as a way of antagonizing the Russians, which is something that the Obama administration was very good at as well.
Well, we have just some news coming from Washington about the visit of Polish President Andrzej Duda in the United States, new arrangements, and, well, we have heard a lot about the possibility of moving the nuclear arms from Germany, from the territory of Germany, to the territory of Poland. Some of the experts perceive it as a reason, as a potential reason for a crisis which could remind us the crisis of 1962 in Cuba. Would you agree with such an opinion?
I don't know whether you would make it a comparison with the 62 Cuban Missile Crisis, but I think stationing more American soldiers and more nuclear weapons controlled by the United States a lot closer to the old Russia border is not a good thing. I know that Poland and Russia have had a troubled history in the past, and the relations are not exactly stellar today as far as I know, but I think this would be seen as a deliberate antagonism. And it ranks with these things we've had in the past with Operation Dragoon Ride and a few other rides around the borders of Russia through the old Eastern Europe Warsaw Pact states. It's basically American soldiers and American armored vehicles. And I see it as a far too close to the beginning of the 1914 war, where you make a mistake, you make a wrong turn, you try to back up, and suddenly you're assassinated. And then everything goes downhill because each country has too much at stake to look at the big picture and stand down their armies. The same thing can happen with one of these Dragoon rides, with one of these nuclear weapons put into Poland. It's somebody makes a mistake, somebody shoots in the wrong direction, somebody reacts too quickly, and you have a war, a limited war or a full-scale war. We don't know, but it's too close of a chance to take. And I think the weapons and the soldiers ought to be brought back to the United States.
Yes, exactly. And what do you think, one more question about the present administration, what do you think about all those things revealed as some claim by John Bolton in his newest book? What is your opinion on that?
Oh, I just written an article for the American Herald Tribune today that talks about that, and I say that was Trump's national security advisor in 2018, and Trump liked him, and Bolton liked being there because he liked war with Iraq and wanted war with Iran. And then when Trump fired him, Bolton came back and wrote this book. He didn't provide the information he's got in the book, whatever is in it. Nobody I know has seen it, and I haven't read it yet. But he keeps talking about all the problems that Trump has and his attitude and so forth. And my question in the article is simply, okay, where was this when Congress was trying to impeach Donald Trump? Why didn't he talk to Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House of Representatives? Why didn't he talk to Adam Schiff, the head of the House Foreign Affairs Committee? Why didn't he talk to Eliot Engel, who was head of the House Intelligence Committee, with all these revelations he's got packed into his book? So I think that it's something calculated to try and get Trump out of office, to side with the Democrats and make Trump look bad as much as they possibly can, even though Trump is his own worst enemy, and go forward in hopes of getting Biden in the fall. And Biden is having mental problems, from what people are telling me. And Biden is not going to be much of an asset because he supports Israel fully as much as Donald Trump does.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, the problem is, I think that several people on the, let's say, European right are, let's say, fascinated by Donald Trump and some of his opinions, and perceive him as a potential ally. What I think personally, and I would like to ask you about your opinion on that, is that Trump is not really the decision maker. What do you think about that? I mean, several people claim, and I know that you have also studied that issue, that actually some other centers of power take crucial decisions in U.S. policy, not the president himself, or at least not this president, but some, let's say, other people and other political circles within. I mean, the idea of deep state or hidden deep government. What do you think about that?
Well, I think there's some truth to that. Certainly Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, considers herself the president, and she wants to dictate terms to the rest of the government. I think in Donald Trump's case, he doesn't really understand what is happening. He doesn't understand foreign affairs. He doesn't understand domestic affairs. He was a bad businessman. And I think what he does is he listens to whoever happens to talk to him last and uses their opinion as his policy. And he doesn't appoint people around him who know what they're doing and who can be trusted to make the right decisions and to give him advice on what he ought to do. He just simply ignores them and picks people who apparently can be easily dominated. And then when they don't prove to be easily dominated, as some of these generals have been, he fires them. And you have essentially a certain amount of chaos in government where nobody knows what's going on. Certainly my recent experience with the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services proves that out. They are changing the rules faster than the information can get out to the practitioners. So this seems to be the whole example of the rest of the government, whether it's the Defense Department or the State Department, which certainly doesn't know what it's doing based on my experience in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia. So I think that Trump really needs to step back and appoint some competent people to give him advice and to carry out what needs to be done. And unfortunately, he's not doing it.
There is an interesting detail in Bolton's book. Bolton writes that Trump was willing and ready to go in direct talks with Tehran, with Iran, and that it was very, very hard somehow to convince him or to push him not to do that. Do you think, Trump was also talking directly with North Korea, so I think this might be true. I think this is interesting in the context because Trump might be not the super expert in everything, and he might not. He might have problems to distinguish who is good in consulting and who is not. But do you think this is possible? Do you think that Trump was ready to go into direct talks?
No, I don't think so. I do a fair amount of commentary for Press TV, the Iranian news service, plus a couple of other people connected with Iran. And from what I see and from what I read on Press TV and what I've been told, Trump had no intention of negotiating directly with him. If he really wanted direct negotiations with Iranian diplomats, all he had to do was send his Secretary of State out the 23rd Street door of the State Department, walk 8 blocks north to the Iranian interest section of the Pakistani embassy, and sit down and talk with real Iranian diplomats. And they couldn't manage that. He would always keep saying, yes, I'm willing to talk, I'm willing to talk, I'm willing to talk. And the Iranians said, well, that's fine, we'll talk to you. When do you want to talk? And that's as far as it went. So I don't think that he really had any real intention of speaking directly and substantively with the Iranian government.
Let us come back to your book, and you mentioned already the second part of the title is Hello Chaos. So goodbye Europe, hello chaos. And I think it is important, if we speak about the Hello Chaos, that we also mention your first, or I don't know if it was your first book, but I think it was a book which made a lot of people talk about it. The title was Visas for Al-Qaeda, and it is about your time in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia. Just in short, do you think that Europe has the same problematic in letting in the wrong people? So we were speaking already about the general topic of migration and of mass migration, of destabilizing countries and doing then a kind of mass deportation of people from there to Europe and so on. But let us speak now about dangers, about real dangers such as terrorism. Do you think that Merkel's migration policy is also endangering Europe when it comes to terms of violence, of political violence and terrorism?
Yes, indeed. I was asked at one point a couple of years ago by RT if I thought that there were really 5,000 terrorists included in the last wave of migrants. And I said, well, I'm not sure how many thousand there are, but definitely they've concealed them amongst the wave of migrants. You can certainly look at the attacks in Paris and the restaurants and drinking places where they had people that had been in Europe, had migrated to Europe, and had gotten weapons in tightly controlled Europe, where people don't have free access to weapons like in the United States. And they apparently had these weapons smuggled through the Balkans, up through the regular migrant immigration routes into Paris and elsewhere. They had Belgium locked down for fear of terrorism, domestic terrorism, that somehow was tied to Arabs and Muslims from outside the country. The same thing happened in Germany. They never had any proof of it, nor did they really have any in Belgium. But it was something to make sure that you can keep the fear alive and keep the people locked down and afraid of their own shadow. But I think also they've had people coming in with fake passports. There was one guy who was involved in crime in Europe, and he was found to have a fake Syrian passport, or a real Syrian passport with a fake name. He and several other people had passports with the same name of a Syrian soldier. And in my book, I talked about the This is Goodbye Europe, Hello Chaos. I talked about how they were manufacturing counterfeit passports that were indistinguishable from the real thing in places like Syria, where you were lucky to get enough food to eat and have time to pray without getting shot at. And I wondered how this happened. I speculated on it. At one point, the French government was producing Syrian passports for the Syrian government. Who's to say they didn't pass out a few extra passports to people they wanted to bring into the country and deal with creating a domestic uproar?
Well, and for the last question, I mean, at least this time, because we really hope to invite you again very soon. But my last question will be very, very general. What do you think? What should change, or are there any political forces in the United States which could change the European-US relations? I mean, the forces which would, well, generally change the foreign policy of United States?
I don't think that's going to happen. You have unfortunately in the United States, a one-party system. You can call them the Republicans, you can call them the Democrats, but they're basically different sheiks of the great American behind. The people at the top, despite claiming to be from different parties, want the same thing abroad. They want American forces all around the world in bases that they don't know how many they have. It ranges from 800 to 900 to 1,000. In Africa and Europe and in Latin America and the Middle East and the Far East, you've got people supporting Israel. If Trump doesn't get in, you've got Biden, who backs Israel, who opposes boycott, divestment, and sanctions, who opposes the Palestinians regaining their own country back. You have got people who say Iran shouldn't have atomic bombs, but see nothing wrong with Israel having uncounted numbers of atomic bombs and poison gas and deadly bacteria. And as for domestic policy, basically they want to keep the migrants coming. They work cheap and they can be terrified. If you don't do your job, we'll send you back to wherever you came from. They are refusing to quell the insurrections across the country. You've got people seizing parts of Seattle, Washington, and trying to do it in Portland, Oregon on the West Coast. And they tried to do it here in Washington, D.C., before the police descended on them. They're pulling down statues of George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and Christopher Columbus and people who were noted slavery fighters. And you've got basically the entire country out of control, and nobody wants to clamp down on it, especially the Democrats. So you've got the president who talks about this, who wants something done, who wants people jailed for 10 years for burning an American flag or destroying a monument. But he's done nothing with it. He just talks and talks and talks and lets the insurrection roll on.
Mm-hmm. That is that's I have to admit, it's a very interesting situation right now for us in Europe to watch what is going on in US, and it will be for sure in future, and I think in very close future, a topic to talk to you especially about, Michael. Would that be okay with you?
Sure. In
Yes.
fact, I've seen in Stuttgart, where I spent 5 years, they had riots there just in the last couple
Oh,
of
I
days.
tell you, and the police in Stuttgart was, they tried not to say who it was, so they said it was the party and event scene, which was a little bit freaking out because they were not allowed to, to go to discotheque because of the Corona regulations. But that would be also, a great topic, by the way, the newspeak we have in Europe, and I think also in US. Unfortunately, we are already at the end of this recent podcast, but as I said, I am 100% sure that we will have you very soon again in our podcast, and we will speak about the situation in US, but also the situation in Europe with you. Today we had Mr. J. Michael Springmann, or Springmann, how you say it in US, US American writer, author, former diplomat, who will join us very soon. The name of the book we were speaking about is Goodbye Europe, Hello Chaos. You will find all in the description of the video. And I think, what is the German title again of your book?
It's Überall, Europa, Deutschland und die Migrantenkrise, and it's available from Amazon.
I just ask you because I love to listen to you speaking German.
Yes. Next time I would like to ask you for permission to print your book in Poland as well and translate it to Polish, and then we'll ask you for giving its name in Polish, which
just let your cat walk over the keyboard, and then
that might be quite difficult.
Just a lot of consonants, and you have the Polish title. So, thank you so much to our listeners for paying attention to our podcast. Hear you soon. Thank you so much to Mr. Springmann and Mateusz. Also, thank you to you, of course, that you come and you are always here, despite of the war between Poland and Czech Republic.
Yes, in this difficult situation. So anyway, we really hope that we will soon again have a possibility to talk a little bit about other topics with Mr. Springmann, and we really hope that your book will be published in as many languages as possible in Europe.
Well, thank you kindly. I really appreciate your having me on your program, your podcast, and I greatly enjoyed the time I spent with you.
This program was presented to you by Manuel Ochsenreiter and Mateusz Piskorski, the hottest dissident who won't violate any time the global rules against racism, extremism, or any other bad isms.